Hey, everybody. Thanks for tuning into this episode of The Oracles. It's me, James, and today we're bouncing down to Texas to visit my friend Tui Snider, who is a author and what I would say a guru when it comes to symbolism on tombstones, headstones, mausoleums, and those old spooky graveyards that you and I like to poke around in. Well, tonight or today, whenever you're watching this, we're going to be talking about witches because, Halloween's coming up. Or maybe even as past here in 2021, hoping that it'll be here next year in 2022 if the apocalypse just calms its ass down and lets us get back to normal. But today we are going to be talking about witches and why people think witches are buried in specific graveyards around. From 100 years ago, people are walking in old cemeteries and going, "Oh, read that tombstone, look at that, must be a witch. Let's all come here and lay offerings and blah, blah, blah." Yeah, we're going to explain to you why they're not witches. I'm not saying you can't be a witch and have stuff on your headstone, but that's kind of a modern-y thing. I'm pretty sure most churches wouldn't let you in and if you're a witch and buried you in the church cemetery, or even some of the old school town and county cemeteries. If no matter how secret coded your symbolism is, it's not that secret, not that coded. So we talk about that, and a couple of the more famous ones where people have actually got followings, and you go on to things like Reddit or even look them up online and just say they're witches, but really they're just maybe just like Mr. Swain down in Texas there, who had enough money on his deathbed to have people build him a nice mausoleum, which was different from everybody else's back in the day. So must have been a witch. No, they're not witches. So Tui Snider, very cool author. Here's one of her books. It's Paranormal Texas, your travel guide to haunted places near Dallas and Fort Worth. We talk about one of her other books about symbolism on cemeteries. Go to our website, tuisnider.com. And Tui is Tui, and then Snider is Snider. Snider with an I, tuisnider.com. She also has a YouTube channel coming out, or it's been out, but she's going to add a lot more stuff to it, or has been adding things to it. It's Tui Snider, Offbeat and Overlooked. Please go to her YouTube and subscribe. And if you're watching this on your YouTube, which is my YouTube thingy, subscribe to me too. Tui's cool. We talk about a lot of death, a lot of witches. We talk about bizarre death. In fact, we talk about a gentleman who fell off a train in 1913 and he was born in 1867. He was found outside of Marlin, Texas in 1913 in a thicket beside a railway track. Official report is a gentleman's leg. He fell off the train, got cut, his leg got cut off, and he bled to death. His dog was also dead, found dead there. He was taken into the local mortuary funeral home where, being unidentified, they stuck him in the front window and left him there, as was the practice back in the day, where you'd come by and you say, "Oh, that's Uncle Fred. We'll pay for the funeral." Well, this gentleman, being that he was a transient, they believed he was a transient because he was found by the railway, and he was dead, obviously, with no identification. They decided they'd do some experiments on him. Yes, before you get into that thing, yes, he was a black gentleman, and this was 1913, so he's got no family around. Let's experiment. And they tried a new embalming fluid on him, which worked really, really well. And he just didn't sit in the front window for a few days to be identified before the state kicked in and paid for the funeral. He was there for 10 years and eventually ended up being a sideshow attraction where you could pay 10 cents to come see the dead man with one leg. Yeah, I know. He wasn't buried. Again, he was found in 1913. He wasn't buried until 1973. Interesting. So we talk a little bit about him and the conundrum of dying back in the day and the different ways you were treated in death. So if you like death and you like witches, stick around, because Tui's going to tell us a little bit about that. And also, if you like cemeteries and you like going through the old ones and looking at all the weird symbols on them. She's going to explain some of the things that you see, and for you not to get all freaked out about it, because it's just, we had taken symbols from all sorts of cultures, threw them on our headstone because they were cool or they had some meaning for us in life. But yeah, we're going to take a walk through old-timey cemeteries, and we're going to talk about those people who had been deemed to be witches and the reasons why they're not. So I'm going to get Liam. Liam, go start the show. I'm going to go grab Tui, and I'll see you guys back here in about 2 minutes.
I see you found our little hiding spot in the universe. Don't get too comfortable. This is a place where you will find those with an experience that's out of this world, or possibly deep within your life. I welcome you to the Oracles with James Tyson. Lean forward and listen. We will pull you into a supernatural journey with guests from around the world, each one experiencing some of the most extraordinary phenomena this wee planet has to offer. Now, here are the Oracles with James Tyson.
Thank you, Liam. Hey, and thank you guys for tuning into this episode. And thank you, Tui Snider. How are you?
I'm fabulous and so happy to be here. Thanks for having me back, James.
Yeah. Well, thanks for dropping by. And it's going to be interesting because we're going to be talking about witches, sort of.
Yeah.
Kind of. Kind of witches. And we were just talking a little bit off camera here, and you were talking about tombs and graves that people thought witches were buried in. How did you get into that? Now, you got some emails you started researching from some viewers, listeners, and
yeah. Well, so a few years ago I wrote that book, Understanding Cemetery Symbols. Here I can show people if they want. I brought my books for show and tell. Oops, the wrong book. I think I have it. So yeah, I have this book, and it's to help people. They want to know what, when they're out in a historic cemetery, to help you understand what the different symbols mean. And one of the funnest things about writing a book in this day and age especially is that readers can contact you afterwards. And I have a weekly newsletter on Sundays. I try to share some interesting historic cemetery thing each week. And, it's just slowly grown. And now readers, what I love is a lot of them will, they think of me. So Monday is my big answer email day. And I'll go on Monday and I might get an email from a reader, and it'll be like, they found 3 beheaded bodies in a peat bog from the 600 AD. And I thought of you. Here it is. I'm like, oh, how sweet. Thanks for thinking of me. So people now, when they're out and they got something a little macabre or grave oriented, symbol oriented along those lines, some of them think of me and pass it along, for which I'm very grateful. It is fun. I like that kind of two-way street. Plus, it shows I'm not the only weirdo out there and who loves lurking in cemeteries. I'm joking, because I don't think it's that weird. We can talk about that later if you want. But as Halloween approaches every year, I go through the same thing. It's spooky season, right? And people are sending, things, Halloween related things. And I love it. But there's one type of email I get a lot of, and it was like, I think I was telling you a couple Mondays ago, 3 or 4 Mondays ago, I had no less than 7 different emails from different people telling me about alleged witch tombs or witches' graves in their state. And I was like, oh no, kind of cringing, because I'm not saying there have never been people who were accused of witchcraft in the United States, but as we all know, that for the most part was in Salem, and not just Salem, but the Eastern Seaboard in the early 1600s, that kind of thing.
Like where my relatives were from? Yeah. Yeah,
those people, all your witchy friends, but when people send me, I've got, okay, where do I even take it from here? I'm just going to say that quite often these people are entirely wrong. And what has happened is that people have found a slightly unusual grave in a historic cemetery and just made up a story about it. Not them personally, but somehow these stories get made up. And just, it's something weird about this stone. So I'm just going to say a witch is here. And before you know it, there's a whole fake legend around it, an urban legend that has no shred of truth, or maybe a couple shreds of truth to it. And I guess maybe I can explain this best if I just give a couple prominent examples from here in Texas. Would that be the time to do
no,
it?
you can't do that. Yeah,
I can't. Okay.
Carry on.
I know I'm rambling right now. So, but like I said, it just these emails I get, they just escalate because Halloween's in the air. We're all thinking about witches, right? They're so very kind emails. Hey, Tui, have you seen this witch's grave? And I'm like, ugh. And I go look. I'm always excited. Maybe it is the grave of witch, but I look and I'm like, no, it's not. So like, there's one over. I live about an hour away from this town called Weatherford. And if anyone wants to see pictures of the witch tombs that I'm talking about, you just go to my website and hit the blog and, scroll down the articles and you'll get to it pretty quickly. I think the article's called, Is This a Witch's Grave? Probably not. So it'll be easy to find.
It's tuisnider.com.
Yeah, no Y's in it, all I's, just tuisnider.com.
Tui is Tui.
Yeah.
Snider.com. Okay.
Snider's like spider, but with an N. Okay. So there is a really interesting tomb over there. It is kind of sunken into the earth in the back. There is a fairly long, it almost looks like a driveway going up to it. It's like a place where a procession kind of up to the door. It had these earthen walls that lead up to the front of this sunken crypt. And it's got marble and stone. It has interesting symbols and an arch. The symbols are like roses and lilies and things like that. And the legend goes that there was a witch buried there. And there's, like most of these urban legends, there's several variants. In one of them, it says if you go up there at midnight and you knock on the door of the crypt, the witch is going to knock back. There's other that say there was a man who fell in love with a witch and she died, and he, a powerful witch, and she died. She was so powerful, I don't know why she died, but she died, and he buried her there, and this as his undying love for her. Blah blah blah. Anyway, none of that is true, and there's really an easy way to tell that none of this is true, and that is simply when you walk up to the front and you're standing at the door, and you look up, you look over the door. It says, plain as day, Hiram E. Swain, born January 1826 or something like that, 36, and died November 1887 or something like, or 1883. Yeah, that was it. He died in 1883. So, hello, there's a name. It doesn't say here lies a witch or any of that. And so, armed with that, it's pretty easy to do these days. Now that we have the internet and there's all newspaper archives and ancestry, there's so many things we can utilize for research that we don't have any excuse anymore. If this were 1900, I guess I could see where I understand, I'm a little more forgiving, but in this day and age, you can do some research. Although there's a caveat. This particular witch's tomb has been included in books and even, I think, featured on like BuzzFeed and things like that. I mean, maybe not BuzzFeed, but some pretty big. So you can't always trust that stuff. You have to do a little research. So, but seriously, I looked up Hiram E. Swain. Guess what? He was a retired sea captain from the East Coast. He came to Weatherford. He invested. He became the head of this like flour mill company. Became very wealthy. And I found his obituary, and it said he was traveling to California, and he died in the prime of his life, and yada yada. Nothing about this man was a witch, or any of that. So, I guess what gets me about this is like, and I also came across articles from like the 1980s where local historians were saying, we don't know why there's this lingering legend about this. It's not true. The guy was a sea captain. But I was thinking about it a little bit, and I I think I know why it was so easy for this to become distorted. And that's because, so Hiram Swain died, and his body was transported back from California. Now, he had already built this opulent crypt for himself, because that's something we kind of forget in this day and age. If you came across some money 100 years ago and earlier, our ancestors have a windfall. Nowadays we get a windfall, we think, oh wow, maybe I'll go to Hawaii for Christmas, something like that. Our ancestors are like, oh wow, I got a windfall. Maybe I will create a really cool family tomb for me and all my ancestors, and it'll look really impressive and, proclaim my social status, because people visited cemeteries more often then too. And it was just one more way to flaunt your wealth if you were rich. So if you want to see this, this crypt, Hiram, Mr. Swain, he had already created quite an interesting and unusual crypt. Like I said, it has sort of a walkway going up to it, and this earthen wall, and there was these chains, chain link fence, but fancy, with like silver chains that kind of went up to it, and fancy, cast iron and wrought iron work, very dramatic, like procession as you walked up to it. So it's eye-catching even today, now that even though it doesn't look as nice. But if you want to see how it looked in its heyday, you can check out that article I'm talking about. So, okay, so that's part of it. There's this is like my recipe for creating a witch's tomb, is you got an unusual grave. And then the other thing that happened was his wife was widowed, and there were women didn't have a lot of options in those days, but whatever, she remarried, and she's actually buried with her second husband somewhere else in a different section of that cemetery. So there's no more Mrs. Hiram Swain. So her lineage, just people tending her grave, were her second husband's family. So now there is really no one left. There are no descendants for Mr. Swain to carry on the lineage and keep the truth about this. So it's easy for people to come and go, wow, this is a weird grave. Maybe a witch is there. I don't know. And the one thing that really frustrated me when I was researching this was I could not find the exact time that I wanted to know, how soon after he died did these rumors start? But I know they were alive and well. People that I've spoken to, at least in the 60s and 70s, but I don't know exactly when it came together. So there you go. It's a recipe. A little ignorance can go a long way, I guess I would say.
Oh yeah, and it certainly does. That's why I was a policeman for such a long time.
Oh my goodness,
a lot of ignorance. You think a witch's grave would just be, oh crap, she's a witch, bury her or him, and just throw a cross on it and run away, or not even mark it, or just burn them at the stake and they're cremated, so off you go. But
exactly, James, that is a really good point. I mean, you're not going to have someone who would have been, if this person really was somehow an outcast from society, they are not going to put them in a fancy, expensive cemetery plot with an opulent grave, and that cost a fortune even by their standards. Yeah, that's huge. No, they're not even going to be buried inside the grave, the cemetery limits. You're going to find them. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
The church, a lot of times around the cemeteries, and they would say, "Okay, sorry, no witches. You have to sneak them in." I was in a really interesting, absolutely beautiful cemetery in Havana, Cuba. I think it's second only to, there was a cemetery in Paris.
Père Lachaise, probably. That's the world's first garden cemetery.
The cemetery is absolutely stunning, and I walked. There was a big tomb, and it had bats all over it.
Oh, creatures of the night.
It was the Bacardi family.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, but when you first walked up, I went, "Oh, this is kind of creepy. All these bats, and unless Batman's buried there." No, it was the Bacardi family, like the rum family. And I went, "Oh, okay, yeah, that's why there's bats on the rum."
Oh, I love
bottles.
that.
Yeah. So, but when you first looked at it, you didn't know, if you didn't know the history and you didn't know the family, you'd be thinking, "Why? They're all vampires." It's like, no.
Mm-hmm.
But
that's hilarious. I want to see that.
That's how the rumors will start. Well, I can still, you come up to Canada or go to Mexico, and then you can go into Cuba.
Yeah, thanks. I know. Okay, one of these days.
What they do for Americans, so you don't have a Cuban stamp in your passport, they stamp a piece of paper that you have to carry in your passport.
Oh.
That way, when you get home, you can throw it away, and your government won't know you're actually in the dreaded communist country. So
until I'm complaining of Havana syndrome.
Yeah, don't hang out in Havana too long. Stick in Veradero where the beaches are. But yeah, it's a very, very beautiful cemetery in Old Havana. It's gorgeous. But yeah, just again, walking up to a grave or a tomb in these spectacular tombs without knowing the history, you can make it all up in your head.
You can, and unfortunately people do. And you have such a good point when you mention, like, why would they bury a societal outcast in the cemetery? I mean, there's another one here in Texas that's really tragic. At least Hiram Swain, it's just rumors, and that's that. But there's one in Liberty Hill, Texas, that people talk about a lot. And I think this one has gotten a lot of publicity, and I think it's in some books and so forth, and it's not true. They claim that there was a slave in the 1800s who named Elizabeth Simpson, and that she was a witch, and she was executed for being a witch. And I have to say, I have done a lot of, I have dug and dug and dug, and I've never found a case in Texas of anyone being arrested for witchcraft or accused, prosecuted for that, and especially not executed for it. I mean, I don't know. I've come across weird voodoo stuff. I've got a whole file of voodoo things that I'll have to get to when I get a chance, but I never really have found a witch thing here. So that whole thing really gets me. This one is another one where I think the whole thing that started it is her epitaph. So I'm getting ahead of myself, but so it kind of started in the 1980s. This guy was doing a lot of genealogy, and he found, his last name was Biddick, he found a family cemetery with his name, the Biddick Family Cemetery, with his ancestors who had been early settlers in Texas. So that was exciting. So he starts maintaining this little historic cemetery. But for some reason, this one headstone in there, he notices some damage on it one day and just thinks it's weathered. Well, it escalates to the point where a headstone that was this big is there's only a third of it left now because so many people have come and chipped pieces of it to take with them. And they've scratched X's on it like you would see at Madame Laveau's tomb in New Orleans. And they leave all sorts of weird, spooky offerings there. Unfortunately, they've even used condoms and things. So who knows what's going on there? Just very not respectful things at all, obviously. And it's that Elizabeth Simpson grave. And people claiming that she had been this powerful witch and that her headstone has a curse on it. The epitaph itself is a curse. Now, the epitaph just says, "And remember, as yo are passing by, yo must die as well as I." And it's got all these misspellings in it, like passing only has one S and no G. And it's just really, like I said, lots of misspellings. But if you spend any time in historic cemeteries, you're going to notice that's just a variant. There are a lot of, as am I, so will you must one day be, these kind of, they're usually more poetic, but they're basically saying, hey, I'm dead. You're going to be dead too someday. Don't be so smug as you walk by. And maybe not quite that way, but they're very poetic versions of this. But somewhere, after the 1980s, somebody got it in their head that, wow, I think that's actually a curse. She's cursing people who come and visit her. This is a witch. And they made up this whole thing, and it's been very damaging because people come in and now they're starting to vandalize other tombs nearby, and it's just all a pile of malarkey. And I feel for them. I mean, I wonder what Hiram Swain would do if he could come back and find out people thought he's like, here I was trying to impress everyone with my opulent tomb, and here's Elizabeth Simpson. It turns out she wasn't a slave. She was just a white settler from Louisiana who came, got sick, and died rather suddenly, which is just actually a rather typical story of what could happen to you when you were an early settler. Instead, it's bloomed in this weirdness, and the family's like, we maintain our little family cemetery without having people coming and doing weird stuff here. And so there you go.
Yeah, it's creepy. You mentioned a lady in New Orleans. Who was she?
Madame Laveau, the famous voodoo. She really was a voodoo. So voodoo you can get into. There's a lot of voodoo out there. I'm saying we could do a voodoo show another day.
Voodoo, like if you're a professed voodooist back in the day and you were popular and female, a certain group may call you a witch.
Well, that's true.
Yeah,
that's true. Witch is kind of a catch-all term, isn't it? I mean, it doesn't. I even know people who are Wiccan. They don't want to be called witch. Some of them. Others are like, yes, I proudly take the term witch. So witch is just like one of these big words that can mean you have to define it within what you're saying. So that is
a psychic friend of mine. She called herself a hedge witch.
Oh yeah, I love that term, hedge witch. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I still baffled by it. I don't know what like.
Well, you're not part of a coven. You're just doing it on your own.
Yeah, you're behind the hedge.
I looked at. Yeah, it does have to do with the hedges. They have all the hedgerows and things. And I looked into it once, and now I can't remember
the whole Stairway to Heaven thing.
Stairway to Heaven. There's a hedgerow.
Is there a bustle in your hedgerow?
Oh my God!
Don't be alarmed now.
Bustle in your hedgerow. Oh yeah. How funny!
The offering from the something queen. Anyway.
Thanks for the earworm, though. I'll have that.
Yeah, it's better than the theme to the Flintstones, which you can't get out of your head for. Yeah. So you've got people writing you, and because they can, and you're an author, and you accept this task, and unfortunately, it makes you go off on tangents and look all this stuff up. So it's kind of fun.
Yeah, and I do. I have a little. Let's just show you. I have this little. Timer. It looks like a ladybug because I love doing research. But I have to set a timer when I do it. Yeah. And like right at the start of, seriously, I'll write at the top of the paper, looking up like hedge witch or something, and I'll set it for 20 minutes. Because then when I start, if I get into a new archive, next thing I know, ding, it goes off, and I'm like, oh, I'm researching, quicksand incidents from, it just get off on other stuff. I can't help it.
I do that on Ancestry.com. I paid the outrageous amount to support the Mormons, to get the actual full Ancestry.com, and then I have access to all the European and overseas records and things and photos and ship's logs and stuff. And I get off on a tangent, and I'll just I'll start it, and then someone's got to tap me on the shoulder and say, 3 days have gone by now, you should eat.
Exactly.
But no, so what I could do, and also I can add other people's, like if you had, I can keep adding trees to it.
Oh, neat.
So I've got my tree, and then I've got another friend's tree and another friend's tree and another friend's tree. And I give them the password so they can go in and they can research all their stuff. Or I interviewed a gentleman out of Florida, and he didn't know quite much about the history on one side of the family, a little bit more on the other side. So I said, oh, here. And we just went through it and opened it up and got his grandfather and the ship he came over on. And we just kept going, back into Italy and up through Italy into the north. And it was fascinating. It took about, 45 minutes, but off you went. And he said, you could do that? I said, yeah, I can do that pretty well with anybody. I just have to know who their grandparents were and what cities they lived in.
It's magic. It is a form of magic. It really is.
It just connects to all the birth and death records and marriage records and military records and ships, who came over on what ship from Liverpool or France or whatever. And yeah, it's fascinating. Mostly European, not too much into Australia, but it's based on an American set. It's like the Mormons it's who showed up into the U.S., which then expands into North America and things like that. But it's fascinating to get back into a few of those things. But it is a time machine.
Oh yeah.
You sit down at it, and then it's like when video games first came out on the computer. Computer games first came out. I'd come home from work at 3 a.m, and I'd start playing, and then the sun was up. Oh crap!
Oh, I know. Oh my gosh, yeah, you could play all night. It does distort time, that's for sure.
Yeah.
It is funny you mentioned. It's a lot of times when I end up on Family Search, I use the freebie version, or sometimes I'll get like a week's free of Ancestry, and I'm looking up other people's stuff. So like for my because for the Santa Claus bank robber, I ended up looking into the bank robbers. I was trying to figure out the landlady of the bank robbers who I suspected of something, and it helped me out like a lot. But then when I was doing one book, I inadvertently was doing my own genealogy, and I didn't know it. That was what was really fun. Yeah, I was doing here, I'll hold up. This is my most recent book. I'll do my Vanna White again, if I have it. Do I have it here? Oh, yeah, this is one. This book, 6 Feet Under Texas.
Oh, I think I have that one. I should have got on my pile of Tui books here. Right.
I got my books over here. I usually have them next to my desk here. So, yeah, so there was this one, there were a couple stories in there that really affected me. And one of them was about these German immigrants who had come to Texas, and they'd pledged allegiance to the Union. And then all of a sudden, the Civil War comes, and they're like, why? I don't want to secede from the Union. Number one, I don't believe in slavery. Number two, I just pledged my allegiance to the Union. What? So the Texas governor said, okay, y'all have a month to leave, and then the war starts. Y'all, I know I love y'all. I grew up and I lived in Virginia until I was 10. So y'all, I come about it, honestly. And so they were like, okay, we're going to leave. As they're leaving, long story short, there's a rogue gang of Confederate soldiers who ambushes them at dawn and mercilessly slaughters them. The ones who didn't die, they left them to die, and even said, let their bones bleach in the sun. And this is, especially back then, not to give somebody a Christian burial is just really adding insult to injury. And that's what they did. And so the ones who did survive actually came back after the Civil War, went to that river, found their parched bones, buried them, and there's an obelisk down in Comfort, Texas to them, and it's got German writing on it. It says Treue der Union, which means loyal to the Union. And so I'm like, oh, wow. And I'm like, that was just awful. So I find out, like right before my book goes to press, that I'm related to those people, that one of those men. So now I need to go back when I have some time and really figure out who among those men, like obviously survived because I'm here, but I mean, or his progeny was already out there.
Close not to being here and making this a really awkward interview.
Yeah, that would have been. Why isn't she here yet? Oh, that's right. Ancestor died in the Civil War.
Yes.
Oh, so there was that. And then I just wanted to back up because I kind of had a question for you. We were talking about voodoo, and this. Now, when I spent the winter down in South Florida, I noticed quite frequently there would be little articles buried in the newspaper or online about how they were finding weird Santeria offerings on the steps to the courthouse. And they were saying, oh, yeah, this one guy was saying, yes, this happens before certain big trials. They're trying to influence it. And our janitor knows to come through and, sweep the chicken feet and everything off, the rooster tails and the bloody stuff off, and mop, the symbols off the stairs every morning. I'm like, wow, that's really a different cultural thing down here. We don't have that other places. Was there anything like that for you as a Mountie that you...
Well, my friend, one of the guys I worked with, he was like, I was a corporal and he was a constable, which, I was kind of supervising him. He was Haitian. I was Haitian. Oh. He is Haitian, Canadian. So we have a large Haitian population in Quebec because... Is
it a French speaking?
French, yeah.
Oh, there you go. Hey, sorry,
so Rudy, a great, big, muscular, handsome man from Haiti. He got onto a UN mission, and his UN mission, United Nations mission, because in the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, we do a lot of these missions in Afghanistan and Serbia and Namibia and places like that. Excuse me. So Rudy got to go to Haiti, and he was all proud that he was going to Haiti, and he told his parents, and they said, what, we spent all this time and money to get you out of that hole? And it's like, you're going back? And he says, oh, it's okay, I go back. So he speaks English, French, and Creole, which is his language. So he's back in Haiti, And which is one of the things that was awkward is he and three other policemen were in a house. They were billeted, and they got robbed. A gang came in, held them all at gunpoint, and was going to kill them until Rudy started speaking to them in Creole. And
wow.
But they took the guns and everything. It was a bit of a freak show. But he came back, and his job was to help the local police and kind of help them during this time of strife. I can't remember what it was. And then late 2000s or something.
Oh, yeah.
Or mid
2010,
2008, somewhere in there, he was back. So I said, well, what was it like working with the police? And he says, they're crazy. He said, if you went to a murder and you're going to investigate the murder, if there were chicken feathers on the body, the police would not investigate it. And if they did investigate it and they caught a guy, the prosecutor wouldn't prosecute it because most likely the judge wouldn't want to hear it.
So if you want to kill someone down there, just cover them in chicken feathers?
Basically, cut a chicken's head off, throw it on the body, and nobody is going to investigate it because it's connected to voodoo. So the voodoo influence in the justice system down there is palpable. It's like you just can't get a prosecutor or a judge, or if it was a jury trial, they wouldn't show up.
Oh my gosh!
If there was any hint of connecting to voodoo, so when
powerful beliefs.
Yeah. Well, so when Rudy came back, he just said, you know, it is a third world country. It is, and they're 100 years mentally in regards to voodoo and stuff behind where things are now, because curses were real for them.
Wow. So
now, whether curses
sociologists could really learn a lot from them.
Were curses real?
Well, people
was there a history of that that actually made it so educated people were actually believers in voodoo curses? Like, was there some kind of thing you could point to saying, well, this is what happened to them, so obviously it's real, but don't know that. But throw a chicken head on a body after if you axe murder a family.
Wow.
Yeah, it was bizarre. And I'm guessing that goes right down to like robbing a bank. You know, cut up a chicken, throw it on the floor, put a big circle of bloody chicken on the floor after you rob the bank, and nobody will call the police. Or if they call the police aren't going to investigate it. So.
Oh my gosh, I never thought of that. You know, it's like working the stereotypes for you. I have an Asian friend who was at an ATM years ago, and these tough guys kind of surrounded him. And so he turned around and he just he goes, oh, does this whole I did a whole Mr. Miyagi, whole thing to them. And they just went, oh no, man. And they let him go. He doesn't know any martial arts, but he thought he'd make the stereotype work for him. And it did.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
I was on a motorcycle group, not a gang, but it's veterans. Canadian Army veterans and mounted police. And one of the guys is like a huge martial arts kind of expert person, but very quiet, very timid, and not wanting to get into fights.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
We were out doing something, and some Yahoo other motorcycle group decided a couple of big toughs were going to pick on him. And as they walked up to him, he just watched them coming up, and he just kicked off his shoes, and he stood there in his stocking feet, and they both stopped and looked at each other, and turned around and walked away.
Oh wow!
Because he fights with his shoes off, like for kickboxing and stuff like that. He won't leave his shoes on.
Interesting.
And he's really, really good. And they just said, "There's something different about this guy."
Yeah.
No, I was going to walk away. And it's all he just kick his shoes off. See, if I tried that, it was just like, oh, your socks smell, bud. Just like, you really should put your shoes back on.
Yeah, dude, man.
Leave me alone, or I'll throw my shoes at you.
Yeah.
It's the myth. It's the fear of it's fear of the unknown. It's what scares deep down, frightens everyone. It's the Halloween thing too, the fear of the unknown. And
it's fun, spooky, a little bit of spookiness here and there, but
the dark. It's the fear of the dark, the fear of a tunnel, a cave. It's that not knowing, and it's that human like there is being a human being, we have this, like, call it a monkey brain, going back, our primal instinct to stay alive. And in my case, like I've smelled a dead human being. Once you've smelled a dead human being, that smell, you'll always know what the smell is. And it's different than from any other smell. And it's different for us because it's one of us. And the same thing when you go to walk around a corner, but you smell it, you freeze for a second because your primal brain says one of us has been killed.
Oh, yeah.
So do you want to go around that corner? So there's this
smell is very
fear.
Powerful.
Yeah, and so you're fearing death because your monkey brain's been told that one of our type has been killed around the corner. And before you even connect it to a dead human being,
wow,
you hesitate when you smell it. And it was awkward for, obviously, in policing and first responders and stuff like that, when you go into a house to check on the well-being of somebody and they're what we call 10-7, no phone. 10-7 is you're out of service, and no phone means you can't contact them. So they're 10-7, no phone. 10-38 was the radio call for a dead body.
Oh, okay.
We would always say 10-7, no phone. So,
that's funny. I like that. I never heard it.
Yeah, but so anyway, you'd get there and you'd go, this is. As soon as you walked in the door, that and the flies on the inside of the window when you're standing outside.
Ooh,
wow! Flies on the inside trying to get out. Coughing. No.
Yikes.
But it's depends how long the body's been there. But that's a primal thing. And the fear of the dark, the fear of the unknown is primal because what you can't see could very well kill you. Not like, you can't, you'll stub your toe or bang your head, but your primal brain says, no, it could kill you. Don't go into that cave. Or,
don't surprise the monster.
Yeah, do something. Rub two sticks together, get some fire so you can see. So it is there. And then when you get into these religions like or belief systems like voodoo, for a layperson, it's the unknown. So what if it is true?
Yeah, I don't want to find out the hard way.
Yeah, like I'll let my neighbor do that because I'm good that way. I'm such a social butterfly. I'll let my neighbor die. But and it kind of that comes back to your Mr. Swain's tomb. Like what is going on here? Oh my God, it must be something bad.
Why is this one so different? Why is this grave so different? That's the common denominator I found. I was trying to figure out because I do get so many of these witches' graves forwarded to me, and I usually just kind of discount them, or I just say something back. I'll go read the article, and I'll just quickly realize, okay, this is in Georgia in 1930. Okay, this is a blah blah blah, and I'll just say something back. But I was like, what do these graves have in common? And it is that there's just something a little different about them. And Hiram Swain's, case, it's because it's so opulent and so different. I mean, he wanted to be the fancy pants, family crypt, and he succeeded to a point. But the other one, I think it's all the misspellings, and just so people just think that weird little epitaph, is a curse. So I think that's a really good part of it.
Yeah, and it wasn't like she wrote it.
No,
it's somebody actually carved it into a tombstone. She was already dead by then.
Yes,
most likely.
Loved her. Yeah, it wasn't like Mr. Swain. He planned his big crypt in advance. I think her death was less expected. She was 30. She had a short illness. She died. The grieving family put
her 7-year-old
money they had. Yeah. I guess they couldn't spell very well, or whoever, because there's, like I said, tons of typos.
Yeah, and if you think of the United States, you got people hitting there daily from Europe with various levels of education and experience and beliefs. And then as they move across the country, and you get down into Texas, you had basically it was Mexico at one point. So you had
it's been a lot of things.
a First Nations or an indigenous population, Aboriginal population. You had Spanish mixed indigenous population.
Germans and Czech. That's why we have some really good German bakery and some good Czech. We have kolaches we eat. Yeah, we get some good. I like all the food. You know, I looking at all the food and seeing how that was historic.
Yeah, and if you think, stick on the food thing, and then think of the nationalities that came in there, their belief systems, their religions, and their experiences growing up. And a lot of those religions lock you into a pretty tight belief system. Yeah. And you're in a tight family group, marrying into close family groups of a similar religion, similar belief system. And that group gets a little bit bigger, but it's still pretty tight and pretty sheltered from the outside world. Mm-hmm. And then as that outside world, as you start expanding out of your clan into other areas and going to like a city as opposed to a farm, and you start intermixing with different belief systems, things get really scary. And that's why you had the whole, oh my gosh, you get into the Irish problem. I shouldn't even call it a problem. The problem the Irish had showing up, because they were, you come in Catholic into a Protestant, they had ads and papers for like maids and things like that with a caveat, no Irish.
Wow. Yeah, because a lot of
they were completely ostracized and pushed out, and then it was a really different belief system about the Irish, where they were coming from, and who they were. Even though you may never have met an Irish person in your life, you would then prejudge.
Well, then it's easier to vilify them if you've never met one.
Oh yeah, and they were treated. They're just like, there's so many in history of North America. There were so many second-class citizens, depending on who was telling you they were first class.
Yeah.
No, I'm first class. You are all second class. Oh, really? I think you're second class because I'm first class. Well, I can't be. Well, I'm Protestant and you're Catholic, or I'm black and you're white. It's like, good Lord. Calm your shit. Calm your stuff down, people. Just relax and don't be afraid of everybody else. And it gets back to fear of the unknown. I don't know those people. We should be afraid of them.
It's one of the things I like about the internet is it does allow us to, if not befriend, at least see people from all over. You go on YouTube and you watch some video guy over in Tokyo doing something funny or something. I mean, funny's funny. And you see just people. I think it really helps us remember, and this is something I think people have forgotten, is that, and something that traveling always reminds me, is that people and governments are two different things. I mean, everywhere you go in the world, doesn't matter what their government could be this horrific regime. Everyone you meet in that country is just living their life, having planning a barbecue on Saturday, getting together with friends. It's that. There is just that layer to life that gets overshadowed by all the politics and governments.
And the internet itself, it's a double-edged sword.
It is.
It's a horrible, horrible place, and a place we can learn a lot.
Yeah.
So it
you can get great information. You can also get terrible information. And so you kind of have to learn then, how do you vet things? We need to learn discernment. We need to learn okay, this kind of content upsets me. Then why am I looking at it? I mean, it's like when your older sisters, this is my case, my older sister going, hey, Tui, why are you hitting yourself in the face? Doesn't that hurt? Yeah, when you've got the internet, I know people who sit there and they go, oh, yeah, politics upsets me so much. And I'm like, okay, why do you then obsess on it every day? Why don't you just limit that and do something that nourishes your soul and makes you happy? Look at the gardening website you love or something, or I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
But people inflict it on themselves a lot.
I kind of joke about the flat earth people back before there was an internet. They'd all have to communicate by writing letters to each other. Or maybe one guy standing on a soapbox in a town square with a sign.
Yeah.
And then two other guys would go, yeah, I believe in that too. And then, you go to the local library and sit and talk about it. Well, with the internet, those three people in every city can realize that, there's thousands of us now. So obviously we're right.
Yeah.
No, there was only three of you per city. It's like you're not right and smart enough. It comes down to you are your peer group is what you think everybody. You're like, well, how the best way of putting it? Everyone is based on your peer group. And I did a talk in high school back in the early '90s, and I was doing my policeman thing in a high school, and a girl was sitting at the front of the class, and it was a class of about 25 people. And we were talking about drugs and different types of drugs. And she said, well, everybody does acid. And the rest of 24 other people in her class says, no, only you and your friends do it. So that was the learning moment that we stepped back from talking about drugs. And I said, everyone is based on your peer group.
Yeah.
If you hang out with 4 people, to you, that's everyone, because it's the only people you hang out with. But it's not everyone. Mm-hmm. But you're tunnel visioned into your peer group. So if everyone in your peer group believes that the earth is flat, then everyone believes the earth is flat.
Yeah.
So when you find somebody who doesn't believe, you think, what are you, nuts?
Yeah. Where are you from?
Flat. Everyone knows that. Well, everyone is the 25 people you hang out with, or the 700 people on your Reddit or Facebook sub page with the QAnon loonies. It's like, no, that's not everyone. That is just a small group of people in the great scheme of things. Yes, if you put them all in an arena, that looks like a lot of people.
Yeah.
But on the planet itself, not so much.
Yeah.
Yeah. How did we get off on this? Hey, your YouTube channel is Tui Snider, Offbeat, and Overlooked. Mm-hmm. And again, I almost said overlocked, because I looked at the handwriting and went, what the hell did I write that for? Mm-hmm. Offbeat and Overlooked. So subscribe to Tui's YouTube channel, where she will be adding a lot more stuff. Yeah.
And I have a lot of historic cemetery stuff there. I have some haunted stuff there. If you're, spooky season, I have a whole, on my website right now, I have a bingeable playlist of just things a bunch of the research I did while I was writing my travel guide to haunted places, Paranormal Texas. So I got a lot of fun stuff in there. And like I said,
what did we just say about binging?
Strange but true, huh?
What did we just say about binging?
Binging, but there's pleasure binging. Sometimes you need a Twinkie. Your work with tombstones and symbolism and things like that, is there some certain symbolism? Well, I mean, I'm guessing there is, or else I wouldn't be trying to formulate this question, but that is misinterpreted more than others is in a negative way. Yes.
Like if you have some weird symbol that meant something, or that was taken out of a book and put on, like, I want this weird symbol put on my headstone because I saw it in a book and it was really cool.
Well, I mean, people can do that, actually. I mean, especially this day and age, we feel less constrained, I think, by societal norms. And we are going to create a tombstone, we might be a little more playful than we would have been 100 years ago. I saw the other day I was in our local cemetery, and I saw a headstone for a kid. He was only 13 and really tragic. And it has this little winky kind of emoji, and it says, well, this sucks. And I was like, my goodness. And so I tried to find some more information about him. And apparently he was really the class clown. I mean, you get that from his headstone. That's perfect for him. But in answering your question, I think what you're asking, there are three particular symbols that I get questioned about over and over that people just misconstrue. And these are things they see in historic cemeteries. So I mean anything 50 years and beyond, although you can't actually come to think of it, no, it's not. You can see these in modern cemeteries too. Sorry, take that back. But here are the three symbols that people misinterpret the most. And they don't just misinterpret them. They think that they have something to do with like Satanism or, the devil or witchcraft again. So the first one is when you see a torch depicted on a headstone. And a lot of times you'll see an inverted torch. You'll see it upside down. You can see it both ways. Now this goes back to ancient Rome, and the word funeral actually comes from funeralis, which meant a torchlight procession. And the Romans buried their dead at night, so they would need torches to see the way and lead the way to the burial site. So that's where we get the word funeral to begin with. So because of that, Christians adopted, borrowed the symbols. And this is something I really like to let people know, is that throughout the ages, humans, we just borrow other cultures' symbols, and then we use them to express our beliefs. So like if you see an ancient Egyptian symbol on your uncle's tombstone he's buried, World War II vet, and he's got this Egyptian vulture wings above his mausoleum or something. That doesn't mean that he, worshipped some Egyptian gods or anything. It's been, it's been adopted by modern people, and quite often I tell people to look at the context of where they are. If you're standing in a Christian cemetery and then these are symbols that have been borrowed and probably have a Christian meaning. So with the torch, Christians use that to mean the flame to stand for your soul's eternal life. And so you're dead, but it's still burning on. And when it's upside down, that's like shorthand for saying dead. Sometimes it'll be snuffed out to say death. Other times it's burning on to let us know that your soul is continuing in the afterlife. Either way, it does not mean that you were an atheist, a secret atheist, I've heard that, or that you were associated with witchcraft or Satanism or anything like that. Another one, this one's really my favorite. I get a lot of emails about this. This is like the number one email probably I get, was when people send me a picture of a headstone. Quite often it's maybe the first time they've been to a historic cemetery. They might be looking up an ancestor, and I'll get an email. And one of my favorites, really, the person was so freaked out. Either the subject line or the first line of their email just said, "Help, was my grandmother a witch?" Something along those lines. They were very freaked out because they saw an upside down pentagram on the headstone and then Granny's name. And they're like, "What?" And to make matters more horrific, inside, between each ray of the star was the word fatal. It said fatal on top of that. And like, is this a curse, that's going to be fatal that I'm seeing this? And I had to laugh, but this is actually a pretty common symbol. And it stands for someone who is a member of Order of the Eastern Star, which is the female branch of the Masons. And I mean, I could have become one, I guess. I was a rainbow girl, but I just didn't continue. But so fatal stands for fairest among 10,000, altogether lovely. So, okay, nothing scary there. In fact, it's quite nice. And the Eastern Star, the reason it's upside down is it's the star itself, I should say, stands for the Star of Bethlehem that led the three wise men to Jesus's manger. And the reason it's upside down on the grave is showing that it's pointing the way. And actually, someone who's a member of the Order of the Eastern Star commented on my blog and said that, yeah, I'm glad you finally said that, because she has apparently encountered this this belief a lot. But I really do think I kind of blame Hollywood for this one, because I love watching all sorts of movies, and it's just become shorthand though. So you're watching some crime drama, and the detective walks into a room, and there's an upside down star on the wall. Maybe it's in blood or something. And, I'm sitting there munching my popcorn, enjoying the show. And I just go, okay, I know that there's going to be Satanism or witchcraft or something. I mean, it's just Hollywood shorthand. But that's a different context. When you're in the context of the real world, walking around, pay attention to the era, the age of the headstone, and you have to take all that context in mind. You're not sitting there watching a movie. This is what the pentagram means, in real life, the upside down pentagram. However, there's an exception to this that's kind of cool. In 2007, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs approved a pentagram for one of their many emblems of belief. So when they used to just give you a Star of David if you were Jewish, or a Latin cross if you were Christian, and that was that. but they've expanded it. Now you can get so many different things. Like you can have a Thor's hammer, and all these different things. You can be an atheist and have this cool thing. Now they have it's actually an upright star with a circle around it. And if you are someone who practices Wicca and you've served in the military and you're honorably discharged, met all their criteria, you can then have an official government headstone with a pentagram on it. Now, I have not come across one of these. I would love to. I always try to, I'm trying to collect all the emblems of belief, like see as many different emblems of belief as I can. So in that case, yeah, that would be a Wiccan person who I guess you could say is a witch. So in that, there's a real witch's tomb. But when you see that upside down pentagram with fatal in it, or it doesn't even have to say fatal in it, just letting you know that they're a member of the Order of the Eastern Star. And then the last one that I like to bring up, because this one seems to distress people a lot too, is when they see a statue of a woman and she's got like a headband on with a star on it. That's just telling you that's the Virgin Mary. And once again, that's that same Eastern Star. It's just kind of shorthand for that. So it's nothing. People will say, is that some sort of secret witchy symbol or something like that? People don't know what to make of it. But those three symbols, I would say, are the ones that, I get so many emails about them that I finally just made a little blog post so I can just quickly tell the person, no, Grandma's not a witch. Here, read this article.
Yes, read the article. Upside down in a mirror. No.
Yeah, read it. Say it 3 times in a darkened room.
Yes. I'm finding, well, I guess it might be just from where I live too, but a grave, like if I was going to say, okay, I want to be buried in this cemetery here, Fraser View, overlooking the valley and the river, and that plot is $30,000.
Yeah.
So I don't want to build a house. I just want to get buried in it. So more people are kind of turning to cremation.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe just being left in the basement. Your call. But if you notice that there's anything, now I'm just throwing this out because I haven't checked because I don't go to cemeteries often, but when you're like put in one of those little drawer things in a cemetery.
Yeah, the columbarium. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, are there symbols on those things too? Or can you just?
Yeah, there can be, sure. Mm-hmm. Okay. I've seen symbols on those. Sure.
Yeah, I remember my uncle, and we were just talking about this the other day. I came home from school and there was a box at the front door. Oh. And I picked it up and I started shaking it and it rattled. Mm-hmm. It was kind of heavy. It had like sand in it and it rattled a bit, but that was his teeth because they didn't completely burn in the cremation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but that was his cremains got mailed to the house.
Yeah.
And they were at the front door and later I looked at it. It was for my dad and I went, oh, and it's from whatever mortuary. And I went, oh, I've been shaking my uncle. But
I had a weird cremain thing like that too. I had just moved into a new place and I'm getting everything out. My friend had helped me pack, and I'm packing things for the kitchen, and I'm like, yada yada yada. And I find this weird brand of yogurt that I've never bought in my life. I'm like, what? That's weird. I open it up and there's like gray powder, and I'm like, why is there grape? I'm stirring it with my fingers, going like, what on earth is this? Mount St. Helens ash or something? Did you give me? And I'm like, gosh, it's kind of chunky. The phone rings and it's my friend. Oh, I forgot to tell you, I tucked some of Max's ashes into your. Yeah, I'm like, I just found my finger. I'm soaking in it. I got my fingers in it right now. It was like, oh my gosh. So, but we laughed because Max had such a sense of humor. He would have found that hilarious.
I had my dad's cremains. I took them and he threw them out in the ocean, but I didn't check which way the wind was blowing.
Oh, that's classic.
So it hits and a bit of the cloud comes back, and I'm like, oh, that's awkward. And then I stuck it comes in a plastic bag in the cardboard box, and I put the bag back in, and I got it home, and I'm looking at it, and there's still powder in the bag. I was like, now what do I do?
Yeah.
But it's really interesting kind of to traverse away from your the tombstone thing. I did a reading for a friend whose daughter who is autistic. She had a challenge, autistic and blind. She fell out of a window and died. Anyway, young girl, about 8 to 10 years old. And I hadn't seen her mom for a long time, and we met at the dog park. All of a sudden, this girl comes through. No glasses anymore, can see, really happy, blah, blah, wants to tell her mother everything. And it was about an hour. It's the only time it's ever happened where we can actually talk back and forth.
Wow.
I've never had a reading like that before. We were both in tears. And the two things that remind me of this conversation was the mother asked, the husband and wife had been separated. The mother and father are separated. They were going to get, she was going to get a bench in her name, in her her favorite little playground with her name on it. And she wanted to know if she wanted her name hyphenated or not. And the daughter said, no, that's up to you. It's got nothing to do with me. That is for your comfort, whether it's hyphenated or not. And the same thing happened. Would you like the cremains? Like they both had a little fancy jar of the remains, like where you put the ashes and whatever. Is it okay if we split that up? And the girl said, that's got nothing to do with me. That's for you or your belief, enjoyment,
that's
comfort, or whatever.
People,
the dead person is like, dude, I'm not connected to that anymore.
See, that's the thing this is the big thing that people miss about cemeteries, because they think, oh, that's where all the dead people are. I'm like, yeah, their bodies are there, but the cemeteries are for the living. They're for us. That's where we're meant to go, have a quiet moment, get off our phones, connect. I mean, I think they're very important these days. It's a place for us to be quiet, because there's very few, the library, you're supposed to be quiet or whatever. But when you're out in the cemetery, you're out in nature and you're supposed to be quiet. And it's kind of the only place for us to do that, I think. And I think it's really healthy for us to do.
Yeah, for those places that still have cemeteries, it's like,
yeah, that's true.
As land gets taken up. I went to a cemetery in just a little bit east of Sturgis, South Dakota. It was a military cemetery, and obviously well kept, pristine, brightest, whitest tombstones or crosses. I can't remember what they were. Maybe just crosses with names on them and stuff. And I did a walk through, and I was the only one there other than a groundskeeper. And I just sat. There was a real quiet place, and I just sat. And you actually could not hear the traffic on the highway. And it was noticeable that you couldn't hear the traffic. And it's a busy highway, interstate. And I'm thinking, that's weird. You can't hear the traffic. And it was just such quiet, and everything just kind of came down, because I'd been on literally it's a 3-day or 4-day motorcycle ride, and really hot and everything. And it was just a nice place to relax. And I thought, maybe I'll just stay here for another half hour. And then all of a sudden, this is why the grass is so green here. And the sprinklers come on.
Funny.
Back to the bike. It's like, no, you're good. You can relax. Next. Yeah. But that was, it is. They're a very, it's a place of reflection that I find.
There are some cemeteries, the garden cemeteries, that have achieved arboretum status, because the trees there are so old, and the plants, the old days, if you bought a plot in a garden cemetery, they would give you a little, I've seen PDF versions of it. Never held an actual one in my hand, but a little gardening tips guide. These are good plants to grow at your plot. And so people would turn that same passion that we do, these days people put a lot of time and energy maybe into their yard, because people driving by, it reflects their personality and the plants they have. There's a certain something with that. People would turn that kind of energy toward their family plot with the plants they had. And as a result, there's some plants there that we just don't find at your neighborhood nursery. You're going to find the roses, those antique roses that have a wonderful scent to them still. I think they're a real resource for gardeners. Just go there and take a few cuttings, because, these are like living libraries for plants.
I would plant carrots and dare people to raid the garden.
There you go.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. Pull that carrot out. Have some potatoes too.
Yeah, some graveyard veg.
Oh, graveyard tubers. just dug it up, and they had eyes in the potatoes. I wasn't where they were.
The hills have eyes.
Your books, like, what was the book with all the symbols?
That one. Let me see. That one continues to be my bestseller of all.
Yes, this is the one. I have that one.
Understanding Cemetery Symbols, and I'm actually working on a second edition that will have more photos and all. So, because I just keep learning stuff too.
Anybody wants to check out these books or look them up, you can go to the tuisnider.com. And you can see them there, or Amazon. Get the Amazons to bring it to your house. But they're good. That symbol one that I have, it's interesting because I can take it. We have a couple of old cemeteries here, on the West Coast, being late 1800s.
Oh, I know what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not like Massachusetts 1600 cemeteries. It's the 200 years later here. But we have a couple of them that are still pretty old. And that book is relevant to the symbols that are here because it's, it's an Anglo-Christian kind of area with, it's an immigrant pop. The West Coast, it's all immigrants, from wherever. But they have, the symbolism is the same that's in your book. So it's kind of cool.
I a couple of years ago went on a round the world cruise, and I was surprised all down through South America, the cemeteries I went to there, still any place the Portuguese soldiers Portuguese sailors got first, it seems like they brought Christian symbols, and so there's a lot of the same symbols around the world. And you know what, one thing you said earlier, you were talking about being buried in your yard. I came across that's pretty common. People do that in the island of Rarotonga.
Did you say Rarotonga?
It's hard for me to say Rarotonga. It's one of those words that makes you say.
When I wasn't that far. I was in Fiji, and I don't think Rarotonga was that far away.
Well, in Rarotonga, it's a thing. I asked them because we were driving around the one road, no street lights or anything, and looking at people. Just did a quick run around the island. We'd get out and swim, and all the beaches were lovely. But I noticed that there were like tombs in people's front yards sometimes, and they were like, "Yeah, we like to keep our ancestors close." I'm like, "Okay, that's different."
Yeah, that happened here too. You could, and most
that's family farms and stuff. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, until I can't remember. It was the late 1800s, early 1900s that there was a law passed where you had to be buried in a public facility or a public private, like a community cemetery or a church cemetery. You couldn't be buried on your land anymore. And I think that came in about the same time where it was deemed that you bought 5 acres to build a house, but you only owned the first or the top 3 feet of soil.
Oh, I see.
So the government could come in and say, "No, we're going to get the oil rights," like mining rights or whatever. It was
that kind of lousy stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. So there was some weird change in the laws. I know up here, if like you're a farmer and you find a Tyrannosaurus skull on your farm, the best thing to do is bury it. Because what happens is the government comes in and they'll take like 5 acres because that Tyrannosaurus skull is, the term is basically something like it belongs to everybody in the country. It's joint property, or it's communal property of the entire country. So they send in a full archaeological dig in to pull this Tyrannosaurus skeleton out, and then it's off to a museum somewhere. But you can't farm on that 5 acres anymore. And
they're not going to compensate you for the loss?
No, they don't. Not at all.
Oh, that's a bummer.
But like you find
should give you some incentive.
You find a skull, and you're in Montana, and you've got a ranch, you can find a skull, you're rich.
Oh.
Because it's yours, because that land is yours. And
okay.
Yeah, so it's different up here. It's like there's guys down there who actually was a little series. I don't think it's on anymore. There's a kind of a pilot series on these guys who were going out and they were finding dinosaur fossils on land, on private land. And they were, but it was private land in the U.S., which meant that the guy was rich.
I see.
It's like finding oil.
Yeah.
Because Tyrannosaurus skulls, for example, they're worth millions to the right
Wow.
museum who buys it. Here they just, they go into a museum and people still, all the people who own it, allegedly the country and all the citizens that own it, get to spend $15 to go in and look at it. But
Yeah. Well,
yeah, so it's one of those weird grave things. But there are graves around here that are still in weird locations. One not too far from here,
yeah.
driving down the road, and there's this weird bend in the road. But if you went straight, there's just a cemetery. It was a family, literally the family plot.
Wow. That's
And
neat.
they built the road and went, oh crap, there's dead people there. So they goes around it.
There's an airport in Florida that has a grave like right in between the two runways or something. I've always wanted to check that out.
Oh, that's kind of awkward.
Yeah.
You know, rest in peace.
I hope he loved
headphones on.
planes. I hope the person loved planes. I don't know this story. I don't remember it now.
Yeah, it'd be noisy. I'm resting in peace, and all I'm getting is screaming planes every 5 minutes. Do you ever get into the different, like up here again, West Coast, the First Nations here, they would bury people in trees.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they'd put them in a pine box, and they'd put their belongings in a little pine box. Mm-hmm. And, you know, gravity takes over after a while, and you've got a forest, and at the bottom of the floor of the forest, you've got human remains and like arrowheads and valuables and cloths and things. But over time, those things just disappear. It's word of mouth that is, this area was a burial area, or this area had a number of First Nations graves. In your experiences in the states in the U.S. that you lived in, what was are there a lot of areas where you could say there was a First Nations tribe there, and this is where they buried their dead back in the day? Or were there
I've seen some burial mounds that are ancient, like in East Texas, there's the Caddo Indian burial mounds that are quite impressive, and I've visited those before. And then just in more modern times, I've been to different cemeteries that were on reservations or near a reservation and had a lot of Native Americans. But as far as, that type of burial is so ephemeral. It's even with people, Europeans who were traveling west too, when they were moving west, a lot of them just had to bury people alongside the trail as they went. So there are certainly a lot of graves in places that we don't even know. You could just be walking right by.
Yeah, I was watching something. It was Kelsey Grammer, and they're doing like a history of his family, and they came up the Oregon Trail, and his second or third great uncle died and was buried somewhere on the trail.
Yeah.
They weren't, obviously, you just didn't have the means to carry a body for a long distance in inclement weather or the heat or whatever. It's just not healthy.
And they would just use field stones. So they would just mark it with a stone. There's that same cemetery that Hiram Swain is in. There's a big section now that it's a potter's field essentially, but that town was a big stop for settlers going west, and some people would die along the way, and they would bury. So there was a huge section, maybe 700 or more graves that just people, they had to keep traveling, but they had to bury a beloved family member, and all they could do was leave a stone or maybe make a wooden cross. And so in I think the 1930s or something like this, or 1920s, the local ladies' garden club came in and decided to, I'm using air quotes, clean up the cemetery. And what this meant was, all those just rambling stones all over, let's just put them off to the side. And these sticks that are here, not so attractive. And they just basically decimated the whole section where all these people had been buried, and to be used for something else, and just tossed all that aside because it wasn't an actual monument. And so, there are a lot of, everything that remains are obvious headstones and stuff, but all the more humble, field stones that mark where someone who is just as loved as someone else lying weren't. And so now they made up for it, I think, in the 50s. They came back and it went into ruin, and then they were like, what? They cleaned it up. What do they mean clean up? And so they tried to rectify. Now there's a headstone that sort of says, here lie a whole bunch of countless people and blah, blah, blah.
Well, so they actually have records of who was buried in each of the plots?
They don't have records for them all. Cemetery records really vary, and cemeteries have not been, this has been surprising to me, cemeteries have not been held as accountable as you would think. They'll say, oh yeah, we keep records, but that really varies cemetery to cemetery, and I don't think the poor folks maybe are quite often kept, their records are kept as well as others, sometimes to a fire before there was the ability to keep things other ways that could really wipe out the records. So yeah, the ability, because there's a book. This woman contacted me. She wrote a book, and it's called like Bringing Home Daddy, and her dad died, and but he had been buried up in Chicago, and her mom was getting up there in age, and she wanted to exhume him and bring him to Texas so that they could be buried in the family plot with all the rest of the Texas family. Sounded straightforward. It takes a lot of paperwork and court stuff to get permission to dig up a body. They got permission. He's in plot XYZ. Okay, great. The family goes up there. It's the day to dig it up. I think you can see where this is going. They dig it up. They open it up, and the lady is in the coffin. Obviously not the dad. So they're like, okay, well, maybe it's the next one over. And they're like, sorry, you only had a court order to dig up one body. So they have to go through the whole rigmarole again, try and figure out where he's buried. They dig up another one. It's a man, but it's obviously the wrong man. And long story short, it turns out that the local cemetery had claimed to have moved all these graves at one point, said that everybody was lying in this certain area, had records claiming that, but they actually hadn't. And it was just a big mess. And I don't know that she ever found her father's body, and it was getting very expensive. So
yeah, there was a kerfuffle with President Ulysses Grant.
Oh,
that he wasn't buried in his tomb.
Grant's tomb? He's not buried in Grant's tomb, like the old joke?
Who's buried in Grant's tomb?
Yeah.
He was buried somewhere else, and I think he was moved to the tomb, or he was in the tomb and moved somewhere else. But if you kind of Google who's buried in Grant's tomb, look it up. And unfortunately, I don't know the full story, but I heard there was wherever he died and was originally entombed or buried wasn't his final resting place.
Oh, yeah, that happens sometimes.
Yeah, so he had to be moved, and I don't know how long later. There's a real challenge going on right now up here. Have you ever heard of the term residential school?
Oh, yeah. Is that with the Native Americans being forced? Yes.
They're forced to go to
it's school. Horrific. And then the abuse. And I've read some. Yeah.
So one of the things they used to do is if you were from 100 miles away and you were a little kid and you died at school, they'd bury you on the school grounds because it costs too much to send you home. Yeah. Your remains home. Mm-hmm. So over time, there may have been records of who was buried in what spot, and the graves may have been marked because everybody who went to the school knew that was a cemetery. Yeah. And one of the ones not too far from, about 3 hours from where I am, the band council, we call them bands, we don't call them tribes here.
Oh, okay, don't you mean?
So the band council got together and said, we got to find where these things are. Everybody knows they're in this field. Yeah. So they got those little ground penetrating radars and went over, found 215.
Yeah, they found way more than they should, right?
Well, they weren't sure how many were there. The trick is, or the hard part is, they don't know who's in them. Yeah. Because some of them were marked back in the day with a wooden cross 100 years ago, and they disappear or they start rotting, and nobody, because their family's so far away, and the church didn't really care. Yeah. When the crosses fell over, they fell over, or they're going to turn it into a soccer field or whatever. Sometimes they put a marker on it with a number.
Oh, wow.
And those, in one of the residential schools, when they shut the thing down, the priest either burnt the book with everybody's names in it and had all the markers pulled up.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So there's one in Saskatchewan, I think it has over 700. They found 700. They haven't exhumed anybody yet because the process is going to be to do this right, it's going to be pricey because it takes about 3 months to get DNA back. If you can find DNA in the remains, most of the time you take a tooth, break it in half, if it's not more than 200 years old kind of thing, and you should get DNA out of it. Then the trick is having to store those remains somewhere where they're not going to get mixed up with anything else.
Yeah.
Or how long are you going to store them while trying to figure out who the person is? But to figure out, even if you have the DNA, you then need samples of a larger community of DNA to narrow down the family line.
Wow.
So that's going to take months. And then if you assume 212 of them, you've got to have a place to hold 212 remains unless you rebury them and just have an interim marker.
Yeah.
Baby male 106, female 107, until you get that DNA back and you can actually update the actual. It's going to be, there's thousands of kids.
That's
like little kids to teenagers and some even the teachers maybe in the school, who knows? But they were buried on the properties.
Undertaking, not to make a pun, but that's a really big endeavor. I hope they can do, being organized is the thing to do. When you mention these headstones that just say infant 27 or whatever, it reminds me there is actually a cemetery kind of near me called, people refer to it as Lost Cemetery of Infants. And it has graves like that. They're flush to the ground. It's in a park. There's a park and then there's a little side area to the park. And when you walk through, it'll say infant number 2, twins number 6. And I do have an article on my blog if people want to read more about it. So I thought it was going to be something nefarious. And so I started researching it. And much to my delight, actually, it was something better than that. It was this home for errant women, as they called it back then. And it was basically anyone who got pregnant out of wedlock would come to this industrial home. They would learn a skill so that they could, after they had given birth, they could go back into society. And so they'd learn a skill like printing was one of them, or to become a laundress, something like that. But if they, infant mortality back then was so high, so not all of these kids made it. And to protect the woman's identity, they would just put infant number 6 down. She would know that was her kid, but they did not want to put her last name on there because they were trying to make it so she could return to society. And back in those days, your reputation could be sullied so easily. And so that was their way of getting around it. And the more I read about this, Reverend Tony Upchurch did it, it actually seemed like he was trying to do something good. I kept thinking this is going to be nefarious and yada, yada, but no, it's actually it's sad in that the way society was back then, but it was actually, by having those numbers, it was to help these ladies be able to then go forth into society later, keeping their shameful secret in the back, I guess.
Yeah, a lot of the children who died at birth was because it was their father of the little girl who raped his child.
Yeah.
And then the kid was wonky. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was very common back then.
Wow.
And, or a brother or a relative and a grandfather, that kind of thing. It's pretty sad. There's a very interesting thing, and I can't remember if it started in Europe, but it was if you were a single mother, and you had the newborn, it was born at home, and you survived, and the baby survived birth. Lucky you, for one thing.
Yeah.
You would go to a church or this hospital or whatever it was, and there was a receptacle,
yes,
and it was like a big wheel.
Oh wow!
Turn. And the baby would go inside, so they would never see who the person dropping off the baby was.
Yeah.
And you knew that it was taken and then
cared for.
Things like that, yeah. And it was very, and it was very. I think they had those, definitely in Europe, in Italy, and France, but I think a few places in North America had them too, where you could drop off the baby and scoot away.
You for some reason, this made me think of it like trying to identify things. This is why, because nowadays we take carrying a piece of ID, so everybody has ID on them. Or if we don't, you could put your picture of you up on the internet, and people find you pretty quickly in that manner. But when something I've come across over and over when I've done research is just how easy it was to disappear. There was because people didn't have ID, there was if you didn't have a family Bible, maybe with your name in it, sometimes they could identify if a whole family died of food poisoning on their wagon train. Maybe someone would find a family Bible and be able to figure out who they were from that. But there was a case where a family of seven, they came into town. Everyone decided to leave them alone, but maybe we'd see them at church. And then when they didn't show up after a few days, they went over to see what was up. They were all dead, and there was absolutely no ID for them. So, they made coffins, they made special dresses for everybody to wear, they buried them, and there's just this row of crosses in the local cemetery. But what they would also do, like if you were just a traveling person, you're traveling through town and you drop dead of a heart attack in some of these small towns, and I have come across this a few times, and I was a little like, what, the first time? Now I'm sort of used to it because, that's what they did in the day. But I love giving talks because I've heard the audience audibly gasp when I mention this. So here's what happens. You die walking down the street. No one can figure out who you are. So they just pump you full of embalming fluid, like extra chemicals, extra strength. They sit you in a chair in a prominent window, the furniture salesman window, because he usually did coffins too, and hope that someone's going to walk by and go, oh, hey, I know her, or I know him. And that happens again and again, and because that's all the best they could do.
That was a law. Actually, my friend, Nora Weed, she used to manage the building that was the last of the 4 mortuaries in Tombstone, Arizona, a place called Watt and Tarbell.
Oh, how
and
cool.
when you look at the front of the place, and I've been down there many, many times. Unfortunately, Nora had to give it up because there were no tourists when the apocalypse
COVID?
hit.
Oh, bummer.
So it's like a little knick-knack store, and the lady who runs it doesn't know what she's got herself into. Anyway, because it's wonderfully haunted. Unfortunately, she opened up anyway, that's a whole other subject. But it's not good. It's not good what happened there. But when you stand in front of Watt and Tarbell, you can see the entrance to the building on the right. To the left of the front door, the small door, is the carriage door where the Black Maria would go in, and it was like where they'd load the coffins up. And to the left of that is a window. It's a narrow window. It's about 4 feet, 3 feet maybe across. And it's where they had to, if you don't have any identification, they would stick you in a coffin, pack it with ice, and lean it up against the window.
Wow.
And they had to do that for X amount of days, like 2 days or something. So they had to, again, you'd be loaded up with embalming fluid and packed in ice. And it was the law. But once they did that, the state would then pay the mortuary for the funeral.
Oh.
But if you didn't do that, the state, it was a stipulation of getting the state to cover the funeral expenses.
They must not have had that law in Texas, because there was a guy who was mummified, sat in a window, and he sat in that window for 10 years before someone ID'd him. And they didn't then bury him. So I don't know. Interesting though.
That's a little bit, maybe it's a little bit of advertising.
Well, it gets even sillier. Okay, or crazier. So he's a one-legged hobo, falls off a train. His dog falls off with him. He and the dog both die. And so they embalm him and the dog, sit him in a window. And like 10 years later, his sister comes by and goes, hey, I know him. So she goes in and says, hey, I'll be back tomorrow to pay for his funeral. She never shows up. So eventually they sell his body to a carnival, and he travels the world. He travels America, at least, for 30 years as a mummy. And so eventually long story short, then this nurse finds him in her ancestor, like one of her relatives passes away, and she's going through the estate, and she finds his body in a chicken coop. She takes it home, keeps it in the basement for another 10 years, finally gets buried. So he's born 1913, what was it? He died in 1913, was buried in 1973. And so there's a 60-year gap. And this actually inspired Don McLean, the folk singer who wrote American Pie.
Yeah.
He wrote a song about it called The Strange. And so because of that, when he appeared on a radio station, listeners were so moved by the story behind it that they pitched in to buy this guy a headstone. And another listener just bought him a headstone. So now he's had 2 funerals, 2 headstones, and a folk song written about him. It's just a crazy tale.
Jeez. Yeah,
I wrote about that in my 6 Feet Under book. Yeah,
have that rule then back.
No, I guess not.
Texas, but in Arizona they definitely did. That was and when you go up to, there's 2 cemeteries in Tombstone. One, Boot Hill,
yes,
and another one. There were people buried on top of each other.
Oh yeah,
they would stack them up. Just because of the amount of land that they had. And then you had the Catholic side, you had the Asian side, you couldn't mix the Catholics with the Protestants. And it was bizarre. And one is really well kept because it's a tourist attraction.
Oh, okay.
So when these wooden headstones, head markers get too rough, they just replace them and repaint all the stuff on them. But there's some very interesting characters buried there. One of the old sheriffs of Tombstone or marshals or whatever. And then a couple
I like
of bad
Lester
guys.
Moore. I like the Here Lies Lester Moore. 4 slugs from a 44. No less, no more.
Yeah. And it's wonderfully haunted too. Well, as haunted as it can. It's not like it's got ghosts of, just because you're in a cemetery, there's ghosts there, because why would you hang out?
I know. I always think that too, but I think maybe we're more aware because that is one of the few places where we shut up a little bit and we get quiet. That's my theory as to why people experience stuff there, because some people never slow down and get quiet.
One of the things that I find around a cemetery is that you can go in, and because of this old paranormal background, is you go in there and you start reading the names on the tombstones out loud.
Yeah, I think
then
there's
you
a
get
power to that.
Because I think they all kind of start showing up going, who are you? Why are you standing at my grave? And why are you talking to me?
Yeah, I think there's
Who the
something
heck are
to
you?
that.
Yeah. But other than that, it's the dead center of town. There's nothing going on. But the one in Tombstone, it's kind of busy because it's a tourist attraction. I think there's a lot of dead people that just hang out there and play with
they're like, hey, why not? Well, my theory is that like a cemetery, a library, and a bookstore, actually you hear about a lot of haunted libraries. You hear about a lot of haunted bookstores. And of course you hear about haunted cemeteries. And my theory is it's just that's some of the few places where we actually quiet our minds.
Wind down, yeah.
Everyone's quiet at a bookstore because you don't want to. And I think, wow, if we all just quieted our minds other places, it could.
Yeah, because everywhere is haunted.
Yes, that's it.
Everywhere. It's just that for them to draw enough energy to communicate with us, if you're near running water, or if you're in a place like Tombstone or any ghost town, any old gold mine, the ground is full of quartz and there's a river running through them usually because they need the water to, separate things out. And Tombstone's on quartz, and it's literally honeycombed underneath. There's a bunch of silver mines. So there's enough energy absorbing and deflecting material there, or anywhere near a river, the running river in a city. You're just going to. They have a better chance of.
Bridges seem to be a thing. That's for sure. Yeah. I don't know if it's the symbology or what.
Yeah, churches, bars, hotels, theaters.
Theaters make total sense. I mean, you got a group of people, you're all feeling something at the same time, that emotional energy, or you're all crying because the heroin, diet or whatever. Yeah.
And grade schools too. Schools.
Oh, yeah, that's true. That's a good point.
Yeah, because it's all bouncing little fluff energy. So, and hospitals, of course, but it's
nursing homes.
It's just a place where there's stuff going on. The hospitals is people who died and haven't left yet. So it's like those kind of things. But yeah, it's fascinating. Death is fascinating, and I'm in no hurry to solve all the problems.
Me neither.
Sorry, let's solve the problem.
That's a mystery we can have for a while.
Yeah, let's keep that mystery going. Tui, thanks for dropping by and talking about the witches and explaining to people that if you think a witch is buried in a cemetery, you're barking up the wrong monkey tree, because it's most likely they're not buried in cemeteries, unless they're marked with that little Wiccan thing.
Yeah, the emblem of police.
Yeah, but it doesn't mean that those old witches from back in the day. Now the voodoo thing is a whole other thing. And I got a whole file of stuff to dig in on that. I'm like, what? Yeah. So, and people can go to your website is tuisnider.com. Again, that's Tui. That's, I was going to spell, say the letter T was two. It's TUI Snider with an I.com. tuisnider.com. Your YouTube channel is Tui Snider, Offbeat, and Overlooked. And you get a ton of books. You can find them on her website or on the Amazons, or just Google Tui Snider author and it'll bounce up. And you do have a blog that's on your website.
Yeah.
Am I correct? Yeah, good.
You're very correct. All that done. Sounds about right.
and thanks very much for dropping by. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. It's always fun to chat with you.
Okay, we'll do this again.
All right.
Okay, bye-bye.
That's it. Let's roll. Hey. Let's be careful out there.
I see dead people.